Go. Okay, thank you all for joining us today at Shared Mistakes, Society's Response to Mass Incarceration, the Death Penalty, and Extrajudicial Killings. This is, I've actually lost count, but this is perhaps the 15th or 16th event in a series we've done that has, in whole or in part, involved the issue of extrajudicial killings in the Philippines. We meet here today following this morning's arrest of Philippine former President Rodrigo Duterte by Interpol, serving an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. So it feels fitting to be back in Vienna, which is where our own work on this the issue of the Philippines began 8 years ago. But it is also a difficult time given what's going on in my own country, the United States, where rule of law is facing its greatest test, at least since the Civil War. I probably should not go further into that right now. But we're here in Vienna. We're safe for at least the next hour. And so we have three distinguished speakers, each of whom I'll introduce at their speaking time. But I will note thanks first to our co-sponsors today, which include the Associazione Luca Coscioni, Drug Policy Alliance, NCOD, Forum Droga, HAYAT, and No Peace Without Justice. Unfortunately, Alison Smith from No Peace Without Justice had a situation that forced her to return home early today, and so won't be giving the remarks as we had hoped. But you can find her 2017 remarks with us on our YouTube account, link from our website if you'd like. So Kemba Smith-Pradia, my longtime friend, went from college student to drug dealer's girlfriend to domestic violence victim, and then in 1994 to a defendant sentenced under the harsh U.S. mandatory minimum drug laws to 24.5 years in federal prison. Her case drew substantial attention and support across the nation, leading to President Clinton to commute her sentence in December 2000. Today, Kemba is a wife, mother, public speaker, advocate, consultant, and author of Poster Child. And there's a lot more in her bio that I invite you to read on our website, but I will add that in 2019, from 2019 to January 2022, she served on the Virginia Parole Board, where a Republican governor appointed her, and prior to that served on the Virginia Criminal Sentencing Commission, and did work with the ACLU of Virginia. She's a member of several boards, including that of the aforementioned Drug Policy Alliance, which has been a strong supporter of ours for a long time. And she is the founder of her own 501c3 nonprofit, the Kemba Smith Foundation. And last but not least, she was the subject of a movie released last year, which you can read about at KembaMovie.com. Kemba, thank you so much for joining us today amidst your busy schedule as a speaker.
Yes, good. I don't know what it is there, morning, afternoon, but in the US it's still morning. But I just, again, thank you, David, for your long time commitment to this war on drugs and drug policy reform across the world. And so shared mistakes, where do I begin? Ultimately, as it was shared in my bio, I was sentenced as a first-time offender to 24 and a half years in federal prison. And basically, I was a student in college and got involved in a relationship with a drug dealer. That relationship turned abusive. And there's a lot of factors to that story that I'm not going to go down, but even my prosecutor in my case basically said that I didn't handle, use, or sell any of the drugs that were involved in the conspiracy. But yet and still, in the US, prosecutors actually have more power than judges, because basically the prosecutor decided how much drug weight that he was going to hold me accountable for. And so we had the issue of mandatory minimum drug sentencing, but we also have the issue of conspiracy drug laws. And based on conspiracy drug laws, that's where the prosecutor had the power to charge me again with 255 keys of crack cocaine, even though he knew and said in the court that I didn't handle, use, or sell any of the drugs that were involved. And so basically, I had turned myself in prior to them holding me accountable for this drug weight. I had turned myself in 7 months pregnant. Like I said, I had never been in trouble before. And I wasn't granted a bond. So I ended up giving birth to my son while I was incarcerated. And the prosecutor had basically told me that they didn't want me, that they wanted him. I was too fearful to turn him over, because I was also in a very abusive relationship with him. And so none of the agents or authorities with that could even understand me being in that position. But basically, I ended up pleading guilty to pleading guilty, and the prosecutor basically said that if I pled guilty, that he would consider giving me a 24-month sentence. And he reneged on that promise, which is called prosecutorial misconduct in our country. And so I eventually, pled guilty, was sentenced. And at my sentencing hearing, my 86-year-old judge was actually sleeping during the expert testimony regarding the domestic violence and abuse. And so ultimately, in the end, my judge said that he felt like there wasn't any purpose in sending me to prison, but he wanted me to serve as a deterrent to others. And so, based upon the mandatory minimum sentencing guideline at the time, because the prosecutor held me for 255 keys of crack cocaine, a judge wasn't able to do a downward departure from sentencing me to a lesser sentence. And so ultimately, with the mandatory minimum sentencing guideline, if you had X amount of drug weight, it was X amount of time that you would automatically get sentenced. And so I was sentenced to 24 and a half years, and that was longer than I had been living on this earth, because I was 23 years old at the time. And I can remember getting in the van after my sentencing hearing and seeing other Black and brown men getting in the van with me. And all of them getting in the van had been sentenced to a life sentence on drug offenses. And so back in the 90s, basically, the federal system, judicial system, was giving out life sentences like it was candy in the US. And so I was fortunate where I have my parents. My parents are my heroes. They advocated for my release along with other criminal justice and civil rights organizations. And that's basically what my movie Kemba is about, that I executive produced. And it's streaming on BET Plus. I don't know if anyone has access to that, but there was a movement. And I'm grateful that there was a movement, and the president that actually signed the crime bill in 1994 that caused the influx of Black and brown bodies in our prison system is the same president that ended up commuting my sentence after serving 6.5 years. And I say that breezing over, that was no easy task. It was basically a modern day miracle. I was one of a handful of women that received commutation December of 2000. And so, ever since my release, it's been really important for me to advocate for others because I had a sense of survivor's guilt because of the people that I left behind that I felt as if deserved a second chance as well. And so, in my film, actually, there's a character, Michelle West, who I was incarcerated with. Um, and she was the first person to tell me that I was going to be released, but she actually had a double life sentence plus 50 years on her first offense. But I'm pleased to say that because of the impact campaign that was launched along with the film and decades of other organizations that helped to rally for her release, Michelle West's sentence was commuted the day before President Biden went out of office. And so, there are other individuals who are still, in particular women, who are serving life sentences in prison. And there's something in the US called the girlfriend problem, where you find women and girls getting caught up in relationships with drug dealers. And when everything hits the fan, the women and girls don't know the ins and outs of what's going on in the drug business. And the boyfriends and drug dealers are actually getting a lesser time because they have more information to cooperate and give. And so, even in this space of shared mistakes, one of the things that, I wish my country would realize is that we should take politics out of dealing with human lives. And in the US, one of the things that I focused on is the fact of, and other organizations, is the power of storytelling. Of course, we need the statistics, the research, the data, but it's actually been also human stories that have been able to move the decision makers. And so I just strongly encourage other countries to give other people who have been impacted and their families the opportunity to share their experience to help move hearts, and also understanding too, in the US, some of us that have been given a second chance and been released from these horrendous sentences basically are the same credible messengers that are out in the community that are helping prevent other people from going down the same path, which that, along with the advocacy work that I do, I also talk to young people about not going down the same path, and also encouraging young women and girls not to get caught up in the drug lifestyle. And so, just to give a few statistics, in the US, basically, there was more than a 585% increase since the 1980s of women being incarcerated. And in 1980, we had 26,326 women incarcerated. And now, in 2022, it had increased to 180,684 women. And the majority of these incarceration lead to the war on drugs in the US. And so, when I talk about this political issue as well, and I promise I'm going to close because I know that there are other speakers. As was mentioned, I was appointed by a Democratic governor in the state of Virginia because of the advocacy work that I had been doing on the ground. I was appointed to the Virginia Parole Board, and I served in that position for 2.5 years. And so I also encourage other countries to afford people who have been impacted in some of these systems, that we can help with some of the solutions. We can diversify some of the ways of thinking in trying to make changes. And so, in serving in that position, it was unfortunate that once a Republican governor ran and went in office, I eventually had to resign along with the other parole board members because he campaigned that on day one he was going to fire us all. And so, in our country, I do think that we have politicized certain agendas and we're forgetting the fact that we're talking about actual human lives with some of these policy making decisions. And lastly, I also want to note, because I know, some countries look to the US to want to model. Our current president, President Trump, also commuted a woman's sentence, and her name is Alice Johnson. I also advocated for her release along with Kim Kardashian. But basically, she had a life sentence and she had a drug offense as well. And recently, President Trump appointed her as pardon czar for the U.S. So she also is in a position where she can influence decision makers on whether or not someone else would have a second chance and be released from their incarceration. So I'll just do a pause right there to give others the opportunity to share, and hopefully I'll be able to share more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kemba, for again for joining us, and again, it is an honor to have you present here. I mentioned not for the first time, Kemba also spoke for one of our events in, I think it was 2004, unless it was 2005. So our next speaker, also an honor, Father Albert Alejo, and Father Albert, the Society of Jesus, is a Filipino Jesuit priest, poet, and anthropologist. He is a member of the board of No Peace Without Justice, an organization we've been close to as well for many years, and works especially in the international struggle against impunity in the wake of widespread extrajudicial killings in the Philippines. Among his books are Generating Energies in Mount Apo, Cultural Politics in a Contested Environment, and Ejemplo, Spirituality of Shared Integrity in Philippine Church and Society. He holds a doctorate in social anthropology from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and now lectures at the Faculty of Social Sciences of the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. And this is Father Albert's, I believe, third time with us in Vienna, and we've worked together on several other occasions as well. And I'll let him speak for himself as far as his work on the related to the ICC case in the Philippines and whatever else this is to talk about today.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for coming. This kind of work, sometimes you feel alone. And every single person you meet with some interest in what you're doing is really a great consolation. So I'm Albert Alejo, a Filipino Jesuit who has worked for many years in the city where President Duterte used to be a mayor. And I can say he has done some good things. That is correct. But at the same time, it was at the expense of so many lives. And when he became president, I was transferred to Manila. And so they said, why are you leaving the southern Philippines? Well, apparently, we will meet again. I met again President Duterte, but this time around in a more sensitive way, because the first 6 or 7 months of Duterte's presidency, he killed an average of 1,000 individuals a month. And in the beginning, it was just news. I thank the photojournalists, especially the night crawlers, who took photographs of these bloody victims. And you can see also in the eyes of the families the pain. Why is this happening? That's the problem. And where am I in this kind of situation? I just happened to be in charge of giving sanctuary to the former killers who admitted to being part of the death squad. And so it was difficult. It's painful to be taking care of the families of those who were killed. It's another job to be talking to the former killers themselves, who I believe had a kind of a spiritual conversion and who had a mission to tell the truth. They told me it was not enough to confess to one priest and change their lives. It was demanded of the spirits of the people they killed that they told the story publicly. But that, of course, was a very big challenge. And so, fortunately, we had another avenue, the International Criminal Court, and that was a kind of a parallel platform. While we were trying to deal with the crimes internally, we also had to explore the international community, hoping that this could be a source of justice if there's no justice internally. Now, what happened? So, as I put there are many victims. One set of victims would be those who were killed, and of course the families. Now, with this arrest of President Duterte, there is a sliver of hope that there could be some kind of justice in really pinning down the main mastermind. Unfortunately, apparently, is the mastermind both of the killings and of the drugs deal. That's a difficult game. You have number two, the persons who are not killed, but they are now forced into some kind of rehabilitation. And we need to also interrogate the kind of treatment that these people are being forced to. Now, okay, one paradigm would be punitive, treat those who use drugs as criminals. Now, there is a changing paradigm of treating those who use drugs as patients, as sick, and therefore some kind of intervention, medical intervention, is imposed on them in various ways: medical, psychological, pastoral, and even spiritual. But then we need to really talk to the people who use drugs in their livelihood. And we have just finished module 1 of our research, dealing and talking with people who use drugs in their quotidian life. There is also another set of victims, those who were used to kill. They were dehumanized as well. And there's hope because some of them are converting, some of them are telling the truth, sometimes, by force of circumstance. Now, that is another set of victims which are finding some kind of hope in this arrest. What I'd like to highlight in this particular side event is the other group that is seldom discussed, the prisoners. So I would imagine I'm the prisoner. I was not killed, definitely, I'm alive. I could see that the society is changing paradigm. Oh, those who are using drugs are being treated in terms of medical help, medical intervention. Oh, good. There seems to be a changing of paradigm that from now on there will be new laws saying decriminalizing the use of drugs, etc., etc. Well, that's good. Oh, there's this news that Duterte himself, and probably his main generals will follow, oh, they might be sentenced accordingly. That's another source of hope. That's good. But what about us? The society is changing, the laws are changing, but we have to serve life sentence of 20 years or double life sentence of 40 years. Having been sentenced unjustly, excessively, during the time when the paradigm was punitive. What about us? And when I say us, it is a very personal us. Last August, I visited the Philippines and I gave a seminar to the personnel of the National Penitentiary. It's called Believe It. And I said, now that I'm here, may I visit my nephew? Sure, Father. Where is he? He is in the maximum security section of the National Penitentiary. Said so. And when I met him, he would like to cry, but he could not. So we just embraced. And I said, how many are you in the maximum security? 14,000. I visited also a friend, Jun Lozada, who was a whistleblower in the corruption in the previous administration, but he was inspired. Why? Because he was about to be released soon. How many are you in the minimum? 1,000. What? The maximum security section has more prisoners, persons deprived of liberty, than the minimum. And what are these cases? 71% are related to drugs. There's been a 34% increase of imprisonment, incarceration during the war on drugs. Now, I'm calling for attention also. For me, this is equivalent to torture. And torture not just to those who are in prison, torture also to, for example, their wives, their children. For many years, how long can you sustain visiting them in prison? It's kind of difficult. And so last year I asked around, do we have a benchmark in formulating laws that have retroactive value? I was told, oh, there's the possibility of commutation, especially if you have good characters inside. Yeah, but these are piecemeals, one on one. Especially good if you have some contacts with good lawyers, you have connections. But I think there is need for a rehash, a review of these laws, and including the implementation of these laws translated into excessive penalties during the time when probably the judges were afraid that if they don't punish these drug users, they themselves will be punished. I heard that there was compassion in giving long sentences like that. Why? Because these sentences were seen as at least better than extrajudicial killings. So we have a choice between extrajudicial killings and excessive incarceration. Now, I'd like to call attention to this aspect of the war on drugs. There are many others, which includes a change of cultural mindset. I'm also calling for a kind of a mea culpa of the entire country, including the majority Christians. The Philippines is majority Christians, majority Catholics, and now we are in the period of Lent. I think we need to follow the example of the killers, to admit that there is blood in our hands. We cannot just celebrate that one person is going to be tried in The Hague. No. There is blood in our hands. Those hands with blood clapped, applauded all those crimes committed under the war on drugs. And I thank the international community for supporting. You probably don't know, but when the International Criminal Court made this kind of move, it was an international action that probably, most likely, and I'd like to believe, listened to international pressure actions of international NGOs. I think David, before I forget that, he has been supporting us. And then no peace without justice. The fact is, he has not visited the Philippines. He has not enjoyed our beaches and our islands. And yet, he, representing many others in international action, have been supporting us under the radar. I belong also now to the No Peace Without Justice. Many people, even among those human rights advocates, are not aware of that. That the No Peace Without Justice has been helping us connect with the International Criminal Court. So maybe I should stop here. I woke up this morning with this news. I did not know how to feel. Now I'm feeling it. And especially seeing you. Thank you for your support.
So thank you, Father Albert, and there's a great deal still to talk about, and we do anticipate having some time for questions and discussion. But we'll launch right into our next presentation by Tham Jiavern from the NGO, the Malaysia-based NGO HAYAT. HAYAT means life. And Jiavern is project officer for research and policy. At HAYAT, she focuses in her work generally, she focuses in on social policy research and reform, in particular criminal justice, drug policy, and human rights. As the research lead at HAYAT, she designs evidence-based sentencing guidelines, engages with government agencies, UN bodies, and civil society, and advocates for humane incarceration policies. Her work first came to my attention for what she does to try to end the death penalty in Malaysia, where there has been some progress, and we all wish her and HAYAT's efforts much success in bringing about more. And so, Jiavern, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks, David, for having me. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to share a little bit about what's going on in Malaysia. I'm sure some of you may be aware of the 2023 progress we had on abolishing the mandatory death penalty. This is always a tough topic for me. I've been working a lot with women on death row in Malaysia, and the things I would hear from them include none of us would have enough sanitary pads, and they barely give us enough soap to clean ourselves, or I haven't spoken to my children in 8 years and I don't know whether they're alive or dead. So these women show me the harshest reality of capital punishment, a punishment that Malaysia has had since the early 80s, thanks to President Nixon's narrative on a war on drugs. And up until the 2023 progress, this punishment was mandatory for drug trafficking in Malaysia. So we've had about a 40-year run, thereabouts. So many of these women were not at all drug lords or cartel leaders, but pretty vulnerable individuals. They were all single mothers, in fact, and also foreign nationals. So what I've learned from their experiences and working with them compels me to ask the question, how do we in Malaysia continue to ensure that justice is proportional, effective, and humane in terms of drug-related sentencing? So a little bit more on Malaysia's background. We've had this de facto moratorium on executions, drug-related executions since 2014, but sentencing people to death for it never stopped. So actually, for the better part of a decade, there were nearly 1,000 people on death row yearly for drug offenses in my country. So even though our 2023 abolition of the mandatory death penalty was a turning point for us, in fact, significantly reducing the number of people on death row from more than 1,000 to just 140 in January 2025. So the fundamental question still remains, right? Why are we still sentencing people to the discretionary death penalty for drug offenses? And how do we move forward from here? So ever since the early 80s, our law failed to distinguish between traffickers, couriers, and those coerced into trafficking drugs. And women in particular have been disproportionately affected. So what I've learned from these women is that they're often lured by deception, desperation, or even threats, in fact. So this mandatory framework for the death penalty did little to nothing to handle drug syndicates, and this went on for decades, right? So even with sentencing discretion now available, we continue to see prosecutorial practices that still ask for the death penalty in certain drug cases, which is quite concerning. As we all know, it contradicts international standards that hold that drug offenses should not meet the most serious crimes threshold for capital punishment. So, a resentencing process for eligible death row prisoners followed for 936 of them, and many individuals had their
You
commuted.
froze on the screen for about 10 or 15 seconds. Maybe go back a couple of thoughts and continue.
Oh no, am I frozen? Shit. Hello?
You froze a second time, but now
You're fine
back.
now.
Okay,
You're fine
great.
now.
I'm so sorry. Where was I? Yeah. So what happened after 2023? So 936 eligible death row prisoners went through a resentencing process, and many of them had their death sentences commuted via this process to 30 to 40 years imprisonment. But we still obviously have significant gaps that need to be addressed. So the most notable one is we have juvenile offenders who were convicted of death-eligible offenses that were not at all included in this process. So when someone under the age of 18 commits a death-eligible crime, which includes drug trafficking, we don't sentence them to death, but instead we leave them in indefinite detention at His Majesty's pleasure. So they remain trapped in this system that offers little to no path to release, even though they were under the age of 18 at the time of the crime. So the same failure applies to individuals with mental health conditions as well, who, without clear safeguards in place, remain at risk of being sentenced to death and left for a prolonged period of time in solitary confinement. So beyond that, even in cases where the death penalty was commuted, alternatives have, in our observations, sometimes proven to be equally cruel. So the issue of whipping, which is a colonial legacy we inherited, has now become a standard component of the resentencing process, meaning whoever who was resentenced to a 30 to 40-year imprisonment, they would also have to face about 12 strokes of the cane. And if folks in the room have not seen a cane, it's inches thick and it would tear the skin of your butt. So because of this situation, we actually had a very tragic case of a man who had his death sentence commuted last September, sadly passed away last October because of this whipping punishment. And we also have another case of a Thai trans woman who was trafficked into Malaysia and convicted of drug trafficking, Danakon Sinsanoi. She was about to be whipped as well, despite being paraplegic. So we had to work with lawyers to help her file a separate application to have her exempted from whipping. So I guess, ladies and gentlemen, in Malaysia, we're trying to say that we must not allow this moment of reform to be wasted, right? Yes, Malaysia has taken a step forward, but we're still far from proportionate justice. So what I would really want to see and hope for is for Malaysia to establish principles that would ensure that punishment is proportionate to the offender's role, level of coercion and circumstances, by way of developing something in the form of a sentencing guideline and developing an inclusive sentencing commission, which is something we're trying to advocate for in Malaysia. That's one. And two, really expanding the options that we have on non-custodial and restorative justice approaches, which is pretty subpar at the moment in my country. And lastly, hoping that Malaysia can work with at least our regional friends to actually dismantle international drug syndicates by way of mutual legal assistance, prisoner transfer agreements, and even just having bilateral conversations about this to ensure that we don't execute each other's witnesses. That's one. And really just making sure that our justice systems move towards not punishing society's lowest wrong. So I've said a lot, but I just want to close my session by saying that the women on death row I work with really guide the way I present this and lobbying, and their resilience continue to serve as a reminder to me that our legal system needs to be grounded in fairness, humanity, and proportionality. So the death penalty for drug offenses has long failed to deliver justice. It never worked for 40 years. It's not going to start working now. And I'm excited to work with friends here if anyone wants to have a chat for a new approach that talks about stratification of culpability and also cross-border cooperation that helps all of us, really. So thank you so much, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Jiavern. And so we have 13 minutes left. With that in mind, why don't people who are interested in asking a brief question or giving a brief comment, raise your hands either in person or with the Zoom raise hand function, if you're able. And also any speakers, let me know if you have questions for other speakers or reactions to what you've heard.
I have a reaction to Father Albert's comment about the victims of these war on drugs. You mentioned all of them, and also about the another thing that I hope, because I came from Manila. I moved here in 2005. And I was watching we were able to meet victims of the war on drugs when May Panier brought a play about
Okay.
alcohol. So we met the mothers of the kids who were slain just because they were mistaken as drug addicts. They were slain by vigilantes, which are paid policemen to eliminate drug addicts. So one incident that happened in Malaysia from the neighborhood where I live, people were afraid to help these gunshot people who were dying. So in my neighborhood, for instance, it was in Makati, in a neighboring, someone got killed, and people who were usually helpful were afraid to touch the victim, even if they were breathing. They couldn't take them to the hospital because they thought they would be associated with them. So one victim, I think, is like what you say, the spectators, us who were there, and the fabric of society basically changed from unhelpful to, you see them as they were dehumanized because it was the propaganda to say it's easy, it's okay to kill them, they're just drug addicts. So how do you think, how can this be addressed to change this mindset? You mentioned about it's culturally, they change the culture. With all these months, years of propaganda that they are bad, they're the source of the problem. And I think until now you still see this narrative.
So we change the narrative. And so we call upon all those who are custodians of narratives. Not just the legal profession, but I said, what about the Department of Education, Department of Higher Education? Are we really promoting the concept of human rights? But then my suggestion is we need to develop the discourse on human rights with cultural empowerment and adaptation. For example, we often use the word human rights. What are the duties? I was a Boy Scout from grade 2 to high school. On my honor, I'll do my best to do my duties to govern my country. What are the rights? I think we need to assert human rights, but also assert human duties. There's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We don't have a Universal Declaration of Human Duties. Now, in our language, we have a strong battery of words connected to accountability, responsibility. Like, for example, the Filipinos remit their earnings back to the Philippines, not because the families there have rights, but because of the sense of duty. I think we need to highlight the different words for duty, pananagutan. Then the other thing is, well, I belong to the Catholic Church. I don't think we're doing enough in teaching the social dimension of spiritual existence. And we have a long history of Catholic social doctrines, and they remain as our best kept secret. And so I fault ourselves for not sharing faith-based political education. And so many people go to church, but they attack the priest who get involved in political matters. The last encyclical of Pope Francis is about better politics. And it says, if the officials of the land, the politicians, are violent, you strip them of their power because they don't know how to use the power that is entrusted to them. There are so many good social teachings, which could also boomerang on us. But we need to learn, and this is not just for the Catholic Church, we need to learn how to assert what is morally right, even though that assertion could boomerang on us because we have skeletons in our closet. We need to be embarrassed witnesses and wounded prophets. And even if our preaching should boomerang on us, let it be. So the activists, we have our own corruption in our NGOs, but we still have to strengthen our advocacies, even though there could be some accusations also against us.
Well, we have a question online, and we'll go to you. Andrea?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Can you hear me, David, everybody?
Very
Yes.
clearly.
Great. Thank you so much for your dedication. And I mean, you know, it's astounding what you've all done. I'm a drug policy and user activist from England. And I just wanted to ask, you know, like what we can do in the light of the lies and lies and lies and lies that are told around the drug war. In engaging more of the so-called spiritual leaders in the world, because I think there are some places where our involvement has become almost, you know, well, it is life-threatening before we've even started, never mind once we get in front of the limelight. So I'm just wondering, because it seems to me incredible that the church has remained so silent on this very, very critical issue. And they're very good at saying we should all come off drugs and, you know, get better lives, which, you know, many, many thousands of us do. And I certainly did. But, you know, there's much more immoral stuff that is happening that they never comment about, which is implicit in the war on drugs. I hope that was a clear question.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess I'm also addressed by that question. Now, I work with No Box Philippines. It's an NGO working for an advocacy to really listen to those people who use drugs. I'm an advocate against the syndicates, but at the same time, I find wisdom in listening to the people who actually live their lives, and their lives include drugs. Those who have to work all night long, and those who have to earn some living. And I think those who are engaged, even in advocacies, anti-corruption, and even rehabilitation programs, we need to double check our presuppositions. Because otherwise, even our rehabilitation program could be an imposed thing. And that also is a violation of human rights. So,
yeah.
More explanation, and one particular element there would be listen to the people we are talking about.
I would like to add that I know that there's some organizations that have direct contact to the Pope, and I know the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they're actually the organization that represented me on my clemency and getting released from prison, but they worked heavily on getting the federal incarcerated people that are on the death penalty in the US. They were able to, them along with other organizations were able to get President Biden to commute their sentence to a life sentence. And so I feel like with organizations that may have an ear to upper leadership like that within some of the spiritual organizations, that we need to sound the alarm. And you know, it only took, you know, organizations to be in his ear. And then forgive me for not knowing, but, you know, when he makes his public appearances and says statements outside his window, the death penalty in the US was one of the topics that he spoke about. Now, I don't know, you know, how you can maneuver, you know, getting that that relationship with him with these various organizations. But I feel as you do that there needs to be influential spiritual leaders across the world highlighting this, because I am completely, I'm trying not to get emotional, but completely appalled about what I'm hearing that's going on in Malaysia. And, even in the US, it's unfortunate that, there were different organizations and people that rallied for me. There was Kim Kardashian and very influential people rallying for Alice Johnson. There was a whole heap of people in decades that rallied for my friend Michelle West that was released. But a lot of people simply don't have that. And so there are plenty of women and men that are sitting in prison for decades that are no threat to public safety, and really just also using the human stories to educate the public, because it seems like the public should be outraged that there is actually money that's being spent to keep people incarcerated as well, and also highlighting the impact on their families. I gave birth to my son while I was incarcerated. I think when you also highlight family stories, my parents are my heroes because they were on the front lines telling people about, their only child getting, this horrendous sentence. And so just allowing opportunities for families that are impacted by this to share as well. It's a hard thing to do, but I do think that it's impactful.
Thank you so much.
We have one last question here, and then if you're able to stay on for another couple of minutes, I'll have a quick follow-up question for you, Kemba.
Okay.
Let us know if you're willing to, your name, who you're here with.
Thank you. My name is Chuwike from African Law Foundation, African Law, based in Abuja, Nigeria, and also I coordinate West Africa Drug Policy Network, Nigerian chapter. And recently we launched a campaign in Nigeria. We had a situation whereby the drug law is being reviewed by the state arm of the government, where they are thinking that more restricted and more punitive punishment will help to deter drug crimes and drug offenses. So what they did that they increased the offenses and reintroduced the penalty, and that was a very big issue in Nigeria. And with support of IDPC, my organization launched a national campaign against that. And we were able to, by the end of last year, push it out. They were able to push it out. So, and I can remember in all our engagements, that was when I found that Malaysia abolished that sentence, because Nigeria always look up to them, all these rats, Malaysia, Indonesia, looking at the way they restrict against, in terms of war against drugs. And so that Nigeria used to always look at their way, how strict they are and all that. So, I really appreciate the presenter from Malaysia, and also looking at also the presenter from, I think, the Philippines. So I really need to hear from you, your experience, the best approach you think to engage the government, who are the policy makers, because when we engage, interface with our own governments, when they propose that death penalty, the parliament, what their major and only argument is that they believe that deterrence, helps to reduce drug offenses and all kinds. Yes. And there is no research and evidence to confirm that. So I begin to think that also there is actually need, if there is, maybe you can help us, if there is any relevant research on that, I will appreciate that, because we are still, the campaign is still on, because we only succeeded to remove the death penalty. They increased all the offenses Like, for instance, drug use, which was 5 years maximum with option of fine, was increased to 50 years without option of fine. So, and almost all the offenses were increased because of their mentality that deterrence, help prevents. And so I appreciate, your opinion on best way to engage them, especially in the difficult situations to push back for such development.
So thank you, your research in the Philippines.
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Showing death penalty does not deter.
Yeah.
It only hits the poor.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and to agree with Kemba, I was wondering, in this time of chaos in the US, have you heard anything about what the next forward steps are that are going to be attempted, and when, if anyone has a prediction yet, when there might be space to for people on the Hill to even think about that?
Unfortunately, I can't, I think I'm like everyone over here, just trying to keep up with everything that's going on. I know on Friday, I was invited by the former pardon attorney Liz Oyer to their third annual Second Chance event, where the Department of Justice in the past hosted people that receive commutations, the Justice Department, and highlighted success stories. But on that same day, she received her termination letter. And I know that Alice Johnson was supposed to open up the program, but I don't know what the current space is. But, I will say, I do hope, one of the things that I hope to do is to re-engage Alice Johnson and find out what her plan is for pardons. I do feel as if there should be a parole board commission, like previously for the federal government. But, also for other countries, I feel as if parole and pardons are also another way for people to receive second chances as well. But I do feel as if that there should be some second look legislation that affords people other opportunities for freedom.
Okay.
Jiavern, you raised your hand. We'll extend one more time, just for you.
Yeah. No, just really wanted to quickly respond to the gentleman's comment about engaging with lawmakers. In Malaysia's case, the 2023 abolition picked up heat prior because of the execution of a Malaysian national in Singapore, and he had a recorded IQ of 69. So what we did back then was really push an international advocacy plan on saying Singapore should not be executing someone with intellectual disabilities. And that also picked up heat back home. So we actually had our former Prime Minister write a letter to the Singaporean government pleading for clemency. So unfortunately, he was executed, but his case was still fresh prior to the tabling of the abolition bill for the mandatory death penalty. So international advocacy did work in our favor on that front. That's all.
Well, let's thank our speakers one more time. Thanks for joining us.
Can you hear me, David? Hello? David, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted to apologize for not responding to the brother's question. I couldn't hear it from being virtual, but I will say also one of the collateral consequences to having a felony offense here in the US is you lose your right to vote. And I remember being at the UN fighting for voting rights for the US, and one of the representatives from Nigeria, a high official, basically said they didn't understand us being one of the most democratic nations in the world. And for me to have served my time, been out of prison, and still couldn't vote. And so he was like, we allow, our people to vote in jail. So anyway, it made me think of that, but I appreciate his question, but unfortunately I wasn't able to hear it. But thank you all.
Well, glad you spoke up in time. The recording is still going. So I'll stand to that. In Florida in 2000, the number of disenfranchised potential voters very far exceeded the number of votes by which that state's electoral college votes were decided, which decided the election in favor of George W. Bush, and who knows what else, how things might have gone differently during the time since then, were it not for that. So maybe that is the explanation.
I think we need a side event with the religious.
Yeah.
Muslims, Buddhists, and Christians on this issue. I think we need that.
Next year.
Hope to see you in person.
I don't know. I don't care.
Just you.
But